Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of G20 Focus here on SABC News, SABC2 and SABC Plus. Tonight we do things slightly differently, and because the Women's World Cup final is on the go, where South Africa is facing off with India. It's a tense moment. It's playing itself out. A couple of minutes ago, one wicket falling, Kaka being sent out there as South Africa is doing that chase, trying to see how they can match that score that was set by India a bit earlier on. So it's all become quite tense in the last while. So we give you an update now. South Africa at 246, as there you have it. It's over. Done and dusted. The ladies put up a brave fight all the way to the final, but it wasn't to be. The wicket there, the last wicket taken, South Africa 246. The target was 299, but it proved to be a bridge too far. India have won the ICC Women's Cricket World Cup, and they've won it by 52 runs. South Africa putting a brave fight, as we tell you, but sadly, it wasn't to be for the ladies.
Here in India 2025 for the first time by 52 runs. The new champions of the world, India, led by Harmanpreet Kaur.
This day will be etched in the history as Indian women, for the very first time, are crowned champions of the world. The persistence, the resilience, the hard work, the history of the women's game.
All right, not the script I wanted to share with you this evening, but the ladies led by Laura Wolfert actually put up a brave fight, going all the way to the finals. We're very, very proud of you, Protea ladies. But to G20 Focus. Resource curse is a term that continues to be associated with the post-colonial African continent. For decades, Africa's citizens have suffered from a lack of development despite the continent being rich with natural resources. This as mineral resource-starved economies thrived off the back of Africa's rich mineral resources. For instance, in 2023, Africa exported approximately $234 billion worth of raw minerals with limited value addition on the continent. If this has been the story of Africa's mineral resources, while the likes of gold, platinum, copper have pretty much been all the buzz as far as minerals go, how likely is it that picture will change now that hard to pronounce but increasingly indispensable rare earth minerals like scandium, yttrium, cerium, europium, and promethium, among others, are the new coin of the realm in an increasingly digital, renewable energy focused and technologically advanced world. Good evening and welcome to G20 Focus. I'm Thulasizwe Simelane. We're exactly 20 days away from the G20 Leaders Summit in Johannesburg, and tonight we focus on the new emerging geopolitical flashpoint that is critical and rare earth minerals. With the rise of high-demand technologies and a move towards renewables, once again, there's a new scramble to access Africa's abundant lithium, manganese, platinum group metals, PGMs, chromium, titanium, graphite, copper, and other critical minerals required for these technologies. So tonight we ask, this time around, can Africa leverage its critical minerals for its own development? Joining me for this discussion in studio, I have Phillip Vilakazi, who is the president of the National Union of Mineworkers, the NUM. But we also have virtually Professor Christopher Isike, the founding director of the African Center for the Study of the United States, and that is at the University of Pretoria. And we're also joined by Veronica Bolton-Smith, the CEO of the Critical Minerals Africa Group. Good evening to all of our guests. So we want to set scene for you. Over the past few years, a growing number of governments on the continent have implemented restrictions on the export of unprocessed minerals in an effort to encourage local value addition as well as the downstream investment. Zimbabwe, for example, banned the export of raw lithium in 2022 and has already recorded Chinese-backed investment in local processing facilities. Let's watch this insert produced by our correspondent, Effet Musekiwa and Sophie Mkwena, for context.
The rising global demand for critical minerals has seen a new scramble for Africa taking place. The high demand for the continent's rare earth elements has led to powerful nations like China pushing for more investments in the mining sector. In Zimbabwe, Chinese-owned companies account for over half of Zimbabwe's mining industry. But tension is brewing, with several of the companies having been implicated for labor and rights abuses, displacement of local communities, and environmental abuses.
My government is committed to weeding out irresponsible mining stakeholders who cause pollution, degradation of the environment, and the damage to critical infrastructure at TZD. As we welcome investors in our jurisdiction, we expect that they will adhere to the Constitution and the laws of our country.
Leaders in the mining industry are calling on the rest of Africa to unite and demand reforms within the sector. They want to see increased revenues and employment opportunities for locals.
And Africa is an unstoppable future. Those strategic minerals that we have in Africa, what we need to do, we need to have an integrated approach to protect our minerals, and look at what is it that we're going to do in terms of making sure that manufacturing must be done locally. You're only going to give a license to trade to anybody who wants to build a mine that's going to go and manufacture within the country, and make sure that whoever the company is that they're selling the product to, the commodity to, must also come and do something in Africa.
As China and the US compete for control of these critical minerals, essential to clean energy and advanced technologies, African governments must take advantage and urgently implement these strategies to unlock more value and reset control over their mineral wealth.
All right, so that's the scene there set by Sophie Mkwena and Effet Musekiwa. So let's dive into the conversation as we anticipated will play itself out as we build up to the G20 Leaders Summit. But let's start with definitional elements with my guests joining me. Let me start with you, Veronica Bolton-Smith, simply for the conceptual definition purpose. When we ask the question, can Africa leverage its critical mineral endowment for its own development? We have to move from the same understanding of what critical minerals are. What are critical minerals?
Thank you, and a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I think it's a good question, and it's a big one, and probably I wouldn't have enough time to really go into the depths of what criticality really means, but let me just give you a shorter version. Criticality is driven by market failure or market need. So a lot of the critical minerals that we know of, as you've mentioned in your earlier excerpt there, are what is driving current technologies. We're talking laptops, phones, solar panels, medical devices, defense applications, and electric vehicles, of course. At the moment, those critical minerals are critical for some of the markets that exist outside of Africa. So yes, we have a lot of these resources, but what Africa hasn't done yet, many countries haven't actually identified what their critical minerals are, what is critical for them, what will drive industry for Africa. And I think we are being led, directed, shall I say, as to what criticality is based on what market requirements are for other nations, USA, China, Europe. But actually, we haven't yet as a continent defined what we find would be critical for us. And I think that's really an important thing to get right at the beginning and from the outset. And then in terms of just developing these minerals for Africa's gain, I think it's important for us to first establish that question around criticality.
Yeah.
So how do we use these minerals to help drive industrialization? And I think that's critical for Africa because industrialization will lead to economic growth, will then lead to job creation. So for me, it's an important point to make is how are these minerals going to be used to accelerate industrialization?
Sure.
That's number one. Number two, I'd also like us to think about, the markets. Where do the markets for these goods exist? Because you can't attract investors to Africa when the markets for these products exist outside of the continent.
Well,
so, for example, electric...
We will get to the discussion about the markets and where the markets exist, I promise. But I wanted us to just start with the pure definitional elements of it. Professor Isike, I don't know if you want to jump in as we're discussing criticality and the importance of defining for yourself what makes a mineral critical for you as a country. Where are we as a continent in terms of those definitions before we juxtapose with rare earth minerals?
Yeah, good evening and thank you for having me. Like my panel said, the criticality question is important. It's determined by a number of factors, which I'll come to. But essentially, critical minerals are raw materials that are essential for modern technologies, national security, and economic development. And in the current age that we are, particularly for green and digital transitions. So, but their criticality is determined by a number of factors, like their scarcity, right? The supply chain vulnerability, the concentration of their existence in particular locations, and of course their importance to key industries like renewable energy, like I said, and clean technologies. And you've given a good list of examples of these critical minerals, including the rare earth elements.
Yeah. Prof, I believe we're battling a little bit with your line. Let's see if there's anything we can do to try and improve it. But let me bring it back to you in studio, Mr. Vilakazi. Just how much is the conversation around critical elements, critical minerals and rare earth minerals shaping the mining industry at the moment?
Mr. Simelane and the other panelists, Chris and Prof online, I think there is something that we need to clarify first. I am in the space. We are in the space. Even you are witnesses to this. The first question that we need to ask ourselves, whether the definition of this criticality of the minerals, the disruption of what is at stake now, to us we don't see any need because we are mining chrome, we are mining manganese, we are mining vanadium. We are mining all the so-called listed critical minerals. How are they critical for who? To us, we don't find anything except just a disruption of the geopolitical game that is played by the superpowers. And if we want to get into the details of this, when you opened the discussion, you said Africa is a product of colonialism. We are in trouble because we did not define the elements of colonialism that we are still championing. We represent colonialism as we speak because many of what we are doing, we never thought of it. We are told to say what we are saying.
So for you, the objective factors, if I stick with you, Mr. Vilakazi, for a moment, the objective factors of this is the direction in which economies are going. Communications technologies are increasingly in demand and they require these minerals, creating a market for them, meaning that whoever is mining and developing them will have, holds, as I said earlier on, the coin of the realm at the moment. None of that matters for you. You are saying we're talking about discussions that are defined elsewhere from a colonial lens.
Look, if one has to answer, there are two key questions to answer. If you read the EU Critical Minerals Act, they are very clear there. They want to do those things to advance and also to ensure that they protect their needs. What is the position of Africa or South Africa in particular, insofar as the raw materials are concerned? Remember, the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Act, it gives the regulator powers on behalf of the people. Look, we cannot be fooled here. There are two things that must be critical. South Africans' unemployment rate is over the moon. And the mines, instead of employing today, they are retrenching. But we are told of critical minerals. Besuhoek in Kimberley, Northern Cape, in your case, it is mining manganese, but it has retrenched employees. Somebody is calling these minerals critical.
Yeah.
Well, we are not immune from understanding the fact that there is a development in the space of technology,
Yes.
but we do not want this disruption. Why are we disregarded as human beings? Everybody would think he just come to South Africa and Africa to implement without Africans to give inputs.
Okay. I think you've opened a nice lane of discussion that I think we'll be able to come back to. But I do want to come back to the definitional point once again with Veronica Bolton-Smith. Veronica, apologies, I disrupted you earlier on, not unlike the disruption that Mr. Vilakazi is talking about in studio here. But earlier on, we were talking to the definitional elements of critical minerals. Juxtapose that then for us, before we even talk the markets, juxtapose that with rare earth minerals. What's that? How does that differ from critical minerals?
Rare earths are generally used in the defense applications that we know the US has a big appetite for, and other markets like China. And they are that's the differentiation. We're using critical minerals in some of those applications, like electric vehicles that I've mentioned, your lithium, your copper, your cobalt, and then rare earths are used in kind of more of the technical applications and devices that we see in medical and defense. So that's how one separates.
All right. I want to take a quick break and then we'll pick up on the points about the markets, the availability, as well as some of the issues that have been flagged by Phillip Vilakazi, the president of the National Union of Mineworkers. I'll get my other panelists to respond to the way that he has framed the conversation this evening. This is G20 Focus. Stay with us. I'll be back with more in a moment. Welcome back. This is G20 Focus. In a moment, we want to show you Africa's share of the critical minerals globally. But before I do that, I want to pick up the point with Professor Christopher Isike, just on the definition elements. Prof, earlier on, Veronica Bolton-Smith giving us the outlines of definition and going into a bit of detail about the definition of rare earth minerals as opposed to critical minerals. Are they a subset of critical minerals, and what differentiates rare earths from the broader category, if I imagine it correctly, of critical minerals?
Yes, correctly. Veronica did give us good, outlay of what they are used for. But they are a subset of critical minerals, like you said. They are a group of 17 metallic elements, including the five lanthanides plus which you mentioned earlier. But their rarity is not in terms of their lack of abundance. The thing is that they are difficult to mine and process in commercially viable concentrations, which is why they are called rare.
So they don't appear the way I understood it when the definition was being given. And you can feel free to weigh in here. Is there rare nature in the sense that they don't appear, for instance, with gold, you would have a reef and you would know that the gold is found in the reef in the Witwatersrand area of South Africa. Here you're saying they don't occur in that nature?
Is that they are rare is in the fact that they are difficult to process.
Okay.
Difficult to mine and process in commercially viable quantities. That's the real factor that makes them a rare mineral.
Okay. So I do want to now show what picture looks like in terms of Africa's contribution to the global critical minerals industry. There you have the figures there from UNCTAD, and the platinum group metals lead in terms of Africa's dominance of global critical mineral reserves. Over 80%, in fact close to 90% of PGMs on the African continent. Cobalt is also another leading one. Manganese is the other one that you do see. But also included therein are such criticals as lithium, nickel, and graphite, which are critical for their use, the way I understand it, in the new emerging energy technologies, your batteries and the likes. Veronica, let me come back to you and ask you, do you want to weigh in on what Mr. Vilakazi was saying earlier on about all of this being, if I don't bastardize your argument, Mr. Vilakazi, being defined from a colonial lens? Who says these are critical minerals when in South Africa and other countries on the African continent, many of them have been mined for a long period of time? The graph I just showed now shows platinum group metals among the critical minerals. So what makes them critical now as opposed to all along when they've been mined?
I think what's driving that whole piece around criticality is, as I've mentioned, things like electric vehicles, which we're seeing a huge global demand for. And just to sort of reflect on earlier comments around colonialism, I think it's really important to take a step back and for Africa to recognise its part it plays in this whole supply chain. Electric vehicles, at this current moment, the biggest markets for them are China and the USA. Mm-hmm. Africa at this point will not have a huge uptake of electric vehicles for various reasons. We still have issues with connectivity to the grid, electricity requirements. We have issues with infrastructure, and electric vehicle prices are prohibitive. Yes, we will see an uptake in the cities, but the more provincial areas, not so much. Yeah. In which case, why are we concentrating our efforts in Africa on just focusing on what I call electric vehicles or battery minerals? We need to start thinking about what minerals we need on the continent to drive our industrialization, because ultimately, in 30 years' time, Africa's population will be 2.6 billion. A huge percentage of those will be under 18. Mm-hmm. And so it's incumbent on us as a continent, as well as our regions and individual countries, to recognize that these minerals that we possess first need to be used to accelerate industrialization. So that's looking at the likes of iron ore. It could be copper, it could be gold. We need to look at minerals where they are definitive markets and multiple uses, as opposed to electric vehicle minerals, lithium, which may be short-lived when one considers that battery chemistry is changing. We are looking now currently at things like sodium batteries as opposed to lithium ion. So if we have a strategy that just focuses on looking at lithium, that could be short-lived. So my argument is that can we please start connecting as regions, as the continent, produce regional frameworks, legislative documentation that really supports industrialization and looking at the use of critical minerals in accelerating that. And final point is just to sort of the point here that critical minerals is not a sector. It enables other sectors to grow. Yeah. So this is a really clear and important focal point, because ultimately this race is something that I find, it doesn't help that we see the word critical and rare in front of these minerals. It drives sort of panic. Mm-hmm. But what I would like us to do is actually just start to think about the strategies that we need to put in place to utilize these minerals. We also need mass geospatial mapping across the continent. We know we have 30% of the world's critical minerals rare earths. However, there's a whole swathe of land across the continent that hasn't been geospatially mapped. And you cannot have a strategy unless you know what you have in the ground and how long for. So a few points there that I think really need to be recognised when thinking about how Africa is going to develop its mineral value chain strategy. Sure. Thank you.
Mr. Vilakazi, your sense then, from having heard the input of the other panelists about your concerns about just the definitional elements coming with a colonial lens. Do we not risk missing the opportunity for value addition on the African continent around these minerals in a manner that's perhaps comparable to other minerals that we've always mined, that we've always been concerned about We don't value add on the continent. We export them raw.
Tula, you see, there are two things again involved in this. When the Paris Agreement was signed to decommission coal-fired power stations because of just energy transition, South Africa was meant in Africa to be number one. And if you look at the value chain of the contribution of coal in the space, in other words, you are not going to have Mpumalanga at this pace. Because from as far as Carolina and the rest of Mpumalanga, immediately you close these coal mines, you are killing the province. Worst case scenario, the decommissioning of the coal-fired power station has never been a position of our space as Africans. We are told by the colonial masters. And for the fact that today, if you look at the unemployment rate, you must be careful of capitalism. Capitalism is always creating a crisis so that all of us, we found being better to explain. But you are explaining something that you are told. Nobody's denying the fact that there is industrialization, there is new technology. We are not immune from that. NUM has got a position from its policy conference to say everything new that comes must not disrupt the status quo. We have got social responsibility as men and women. But if people are disregarding the employment opportunities created in the country by giving us some foreign tendencies of telling us that you decommission all you have, I mean, why coal is not made to be part of these critical minerals? Two things. If you look at this, it's not us who are doing pollution. At the time we were told that we must decommission, the same countries, your EU and your US, they reverted back during load shedding. We must not jump over these things. The sequence of events will tell you, from COVID we were introduced to load shedding. Now we are introduced to critical minerals.
All right. Let's pause there for a moment. When we continue the conversation, we'll weigh the issue around critical and rare earth minerals into geopolitics. You are seeing a lot of moves, countries moving to secure their own supplies, the United States being key among them. Their president recently having visited a number of countries in Asia with that agenda in mind. How does that factor in terms of how the G20 conversations will be happening and how powers such as the United States relate with lesser developed countries that perhaps have the potential for critical and rare earth minerals? That we pick up in a moment. Welcome back to G20 Focus. Let's get Mr. Phillip Vilakazi to finish. You wanted to conclude a point that you were making before the break, before we go to talking about how these critical minerals are weighing in on the global geopolitical conversations, yeah?
Yes. You see, if you look at the role that coal is playing in the economy, immediately it is not part of these so-called critical minerals. It gives you a thinking that says, why technology cannot be used to reduce the emissions? So that we continue to have this product because it is giving social life a dignity. A man who is unemployed doesn't have a dignity.
I don't know, though, Mr. Vilakazi, if the two are mutually exclusive. I think in as far as the energy conversation is concerned, and the point has now been made loudly enough and clearly enough that it's not binary. It's an energy mix that we're talking about. Lower carbon emissions. The South African IRP, for example, talks about a role for coal continuing where that can be used, but cleaner coal. So I don't know if we're talking about a choice between traditional minerals coal or the critical mineral that we're talking about now.
You see, I'm talking in the space where when the amendment of the IRP 19, as the NUM had the proposal to say, can we give this maybe at least 10 years? Why 10? Because the speed in which this energy mix is concerned, take it from me, it doesn't work for us as South Africans, especially in the industry where I am. We are swimming in the pool of Section 189s. As I speak now, we have got a notice from another coal-producing company about this. But having said what you said, I think all what we need to do is to be careful of the superpowers who are telling us what to do. We don't even think about how can we do it. For us is to say, when they say jump, we say how high. It can't be.
All right. So let's show you then, we were talking earlier on about countries moving to secure their own supplies of these minerals, critical and rare earth minerals. Let's show you just a picture of cobalt. And as far as the DRC is concerned, because it really goes to the heart of tonight's conversation. DRC accounting for about 70% of the global supply of cobalt. So you can imagine this is an element that is critical in the manufacture of rechargeable batteries, for example. It's one of those elements that go into it. And it's not the only one, by the way, where the DRC dominates. Coltan is the other one that you can imagine, that you can talk about. And that's why in the last while you've been seeing this agreement, for example, with the United States moving to have an agreement with the DRC. Let me bring in, as you look at that, that's the projected growth of global critical minerals market. There, those figures you're seeing are in US dollars. So that's 400 billion US dollars in 2022, and it's increasing steadily such that by 2030, you'll be hovering somewhere between 500 billion US dollars as a market and 600 billion US dollars. So that's the projection coming through from King's Research. Let me go back to Professor Isike to pick up the point. Prof, just on the issue of the global demand as well as the geopolitics, we were showing a graphic earlier on that talks to the DRC's supply of cobalt, and we could have chosen any of the other minerals that are critical that the DRC leads in terms of supply. We chose the DRC because it is the emblematic story of just being resource rich, but at the same time not being able to leverage that for development, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And this is the resource cost that the paradox of having so much resources and then, not being developed, right? That we're talking about the fact that this new scrabble for Africa resources will keep Africa in the same position that we were. The classic dependency theory of where we provide the raw materials and then the others who buy the raw materials determine the price for us to buy and sell back to us. So it is sad that we have over 30% of the world's mineral resources, both the critical and the rare earths, but yet we capture less than 5% of global value. And almost none of the downstream manufacturing value, whether it's for your battery cells, your electric vehicles like Veronica was talking about, or even green tech. And this is rooted in geopolitics, like you said. The asymmetric power relations between individual countries in Africa and even as a group against major powers like the United States, China, that are racing to secure supply chains for critical minerals under the guise of energy security, like our NUM panelist was talking about. So the point here is that these disadvantages have always been the case for us. And the reason why that is because we have not been able to organize ourselves collectively as a group, to leverage our resources. Like Veronica said, know them, do an audit of them, know them, and then begin to negotiate with what we have, especially in this current transactional climate of foreign policy. So there was one of the questions you put on the screen, who are Africa's critical minerals for? It links to the question of the states. What is the state? Who is the state and government for in Africa? Is it for the elites alone, or is it for all Africans across board? These questions are connected to the question of who the critical minerals are for. Because if we don't know who the state exists for, why it exists, and who it is working for, then we will not be able to answer the question of who the minerals belong to.
Veronica, please jump in on that point. Are there factors that militate for Africa this time around, as we talk rare earth and critical minerals, being able to leverage them for development, or are there factors actually, more factors that militate against that?
Look, I think it's been very interesting to listen to the conversation unfold. But from where I'm sitting, we are in a position of strength. Africa possesses a huge amount of these minerals, okay? But what we, as the professors just mentioned, we are not good. We don't have a conductor for this orchestra, if I can put it in these musical terms that I'm used to.
That.
We need, and this is where we really need to start to see the AU and the AFCFTA come to fore, because we require harmonization across borders to be able to utilize these minerals and grow value chains. But the one thing I've noticed when having these discussions, and one thing Critical Minerals Africa Group does, is we work with governments to develop strategies, but we also work with the private sector. I've spent 20 years working with investors. And so I often find in these discussions that the lens of the investor is forgotten about. We think about the sort of big picture theories, but actually from the investor's perspective, what are they interested in? They are interested in market size. They will not enter anywhere unless they know that they're going to have a return on investment, that their money is secure, they can get it out easily, but also they're looking at how can they have market size, how can they enter bigger market spaces. And so from that perspective, it's incumbent on national strategies to start thinking about regional strategies, because actually to develop value chains, you do need to go and ask your neighbours for the skills that they may possess to help you grow your value chain or develop your value chain. You may need to have access to a port that isn't in a landlocked country, but your neighbour may possess that. So it's about having that kind of harmonisation, and certainly having the conductor being able to tell us, this is how we can shape this value chain. And just to also mention that value chains for critical minerals are not like value chains for coffee processing, manufacturing, or other value chains that we are seeing starting to emerge more frequently across the continent. They are very, very tricky. They require strong ESG frameworks and regulations, and they cannot be seen in the same way that one would adopt an agro-processing value chain, for example. So from that perspective, it really needs to be looked at very, very clearly and very carefully. And I think, just to go back to that earlier point around, how can Africa really make sure that it's maximizing on the use of its critical minerals? The only way it can do that is to have a strong strategy that looks at a 30-year view and not a short-term election cycle 5-year view, and start to think about how you're starting to bring in your people skills, capacity building, because that's how you grow markets. If you know that you've got the manpower there that can service it, you need to invest in education, you need to invest in the technical skills. And there's lots more, but I know I'm being cut short here, so let me stop.
No, it's fine. We'll come back to that point in a moment, because you lead us nicely there, Veronica, because we will focus in the next few minutes about who the key players are, including China at the moment, in terms of the conversation around critical and rare earth minerals. China as a player on its own, but also China as a player within investment on the African continent. So we'll pick up on that point in a moment. Welcome back. Well, the conversation around supply chains of critical minerals has shaped really relations between global powers, the United States and China, in the last few months. You will have seen in the last few days a conversation between President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping. Part of that was focusing on China's supply to the United States for their needs for critical minerals and rare earth minerals. It sort of raised the question of whether or not we could see the G20 Leaders Summit being another staging post for some of those subtle geopolitical tensions. Let me show you what China's contribution is at the moment before we go further with the conversation in terms of its contribution to critical minerals. And there you see the distinction between critical minerals and rare earth elements. China leading almost dominant in as far as some of the critical elements such as gallium, manganesium, tungsten, and silicon. Then immediately after that, you see the rare earth elements. And the reason I wanted to show you that is that I suspect it may talk to that Veronica was making a bit earlier on. Veronica, please pick up for me on that point. The conversation right now is that China dominates both production of rare earths as well as development of those and value addition and beneficiation and the likes. And I like the point, and I want you to pick up on it, the juxtaposition of the African continent. Where are we as far as rare earths are concerned? And is that a factor of us knowing what we have or not knowing what we have?
I think a bit of both, but I'd say predominantly we don't know. We haven't had full-scale mapping across the continent in an extensive way. I look at countries like Tanzania; they have 16% of the country geospatially mapped. And that's six. Almost across 1/6. Wow. Yes. And there are many other countries that are in a similar position. I think you can't think about how you're going to develop minerals if you don't know what you have in the ground and how long you have it in the ground for. So that's number one. Geospatial mapping is really important for us to get clear as to what we have, and also for that to be owned by the state. That's another important point to make, because often is the case that these maps are not, they're not available to countries to know what they have. So I think that's really a vital thing that we need to recognize and get straight away, geospatial mapping. Second of all, it's around that point I made earlier, which is what are we using these minerals for? Currently, I've already mentioned that those minerals are being driven by the criticality for other markets. But as a continent, we're still not where we need to be in terms of knowing what we need. We know Africa needs to industrialize. With the reduction of foreign aid that is going on across the board, we are definitely going to need to be in a position of economic growth, and we cannot have economic growth unless we industrialize. We cannot industrialize unless we have good and cheap, reliable power. We have sound infrastructure, and that's ports, that's rails, that's road, and we also have access to water. That's how you move up a value chain. That's how you start to manufacture. That's how you process. Critical minerals require those three things. And so if we don't have those in place, we can't start talking about beneficiation and value addition. So we need to go back to the drawing board and start from a position of really understanding what we have, how we're going to use it, and also thinking about Africa as the marketplace. Right. Yes, Africa is going to be a huge trading bloc, the biggest in the world, if we're able to sort of sing from one hymn sheet. However, Africa has the potential to actually be for us to encourage intra-Africa trade, to help boost that economic growth that I talked about, and also job creation. So for Africa, what is coming down the line, as I've already mentioned, is this huge population surge. And to be able to get people into jobs, we need to create the industries to allow people to have those jobs. And we cannot do that unless we start thinking about how we're using these minerals for that end game. So I think that's the focus here. Yeah,
Mr. Vilakazi, how does that sit with you? The potential off the back of these critical minerals.
Look, Simelane, I think Vero has a point. We are not immune from development. The fact of the matter is the policy position. You see, before we can talk about skills, and you are raising a point that says, do we know how many rare earth minerals we have? It's a standing question. That's why we need then to refer into the regulator to say, how far are you in knowing what we have and for how long are we going to have it? And what is it that is expected of us as a country? That's when we'll come to the skills, because there's no need to have a cat during the night using a whip. You need to be clear, what are you looking for? The kind of skill you're developing should be a skill that is responsive to the need. Not just to go to school for the sake of keeping you busy.
Until we're clear on what we have.
Exactly.
We don't know what skills we need to be able to develop what we have.
Immediately then we are like that. Africa is not going to be a price taker anymore. We'll be able to sit down, and from a very academic space, we are able to defend our position. For now, the advantage is because people know that in Africa you talk, they do. They complain while they're busy doing. It's like we sit down and agree first. Why this, and for how long are we going to do this?
All right. Let's pause there for a moment. We're drawing towards a close of this evening's shows on how we anticipate these conversations to play themselves, perhaps even in the last year of South Africa's presidency, but also importantly leading up to the G20 Leaders Summit later on this month. That and more coming up in a moment. Welcome back. Let me get the parting shots of my panelists this evening without wasting any time. Let me go straight to Professor Christopher Isike. Prof, just pick up a minute or so your parting shots about how Africa can, I don't know, towards the end of its presidency of the G20, cement any work that it has done in this area of driving the global conversation. How can we cement it as we host the G20 Leaders Summit? Professor Isike? Okay, we seem to have a bit of a problem. Veronica, I don't know if on that point as your parting shot. I don't know the kind of work that South Africa has done during its presidency to shape the G20 conversation around critical and rare earth minerals. How can South Africa cement that work as it hosts the summit?
Yeah, thank you. I think, look, you have a unique position. You're going to have a number of countries in South Africa where you're able to share with them, your roadmap and your plan and Africa's roadmap. And I think essentially what we need to start seeing is the encouragement of investors into perhaps some of the downstream places. I would like to personally start to see a coordination of the policymakers, the investors, the mining companies, the processors, and the manufacturers, as well as the power pools, because it's going to take a concerted effort to ensure that these minerals are used in a sustainable way for a long period of time, and they are driving industrialization. And what I'm seeing so far are peace conversations in different quarters where there's a lot of repetition, but there isn't a clear view as to what we're going to do by when and how. And so for me, I think it's bringing all those key stakeholders and convening some kind of discussion.
Yeah. So sorry, Veronica.
Power that I think South Africa has.
Yeah, thank you for that. I apologize. Let me go straight to Professor Isike. Your parting shot in less than a minute, please.
Okay, so I know that there's a fervent tendency towards nationalization right now in Africa, but I'm saying that Africa does not need to nationalize its minerals. It needs to continentalize its vision for those minerals. For us to truly leverage our critical minerals, we must act as a unified bloc. We need to develop policy coherence and then invest in knowledge-based governance. And if we do this right, we could move in supply of raw materials, and critical minerals to becoming a hub for green industrialization. And I think that South Africa is well placed to push that continental vision.
All right. That's short and sharp for me. Your parting shots.
For me is to say Africa must then be called the United States of Africa and be proud of the natural resources that they have and make it a point that unemployment in this country and the continent, it becomes something of the past.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for having joined. That's it. That's the show for this week. Join us next week when we'll be discussing global wealth inequality ahead of the G20 summit. Cheers.